So good Friday morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to help me learn about and explore the little things we find in our backyards. Some of these we see all the time and maybe we don't think twice about them, but when we do pause and really observe the environment where we are staying, our backyards, we find there are an awful lot of really cool stories. The cover critter for this week's talk is the Canada Goose. Maybe a little stretch to call it a member of our backyard wildlife community, but I'm sure some of you have yards that might earn the visit of a goose or two. And I think it's safe to say that all of us can hear the sound of the Canada goose from our yards or our houses, especially this time of year. I know some of you like to keep track of the very first bird you come across on the first day of a new year on January 1st, when the days are getting longer. And I know for me, the Canada goose has earned that spot at least once every 2 or 3 years. Of course, there was the one year that Robin remembers on an Urban Ecology Center eco-travel trip to Costa Rica. We left Wisconsin on December 31st and woke up January 1st in a hotel room in San Jose. And I'm pretty sure that both Robin and I had the great Kiskadee as our first bird of the year that year. Earlier this week was Indigenous Peoples Day, and I encourage you to find ways to support the earlier settlers in our area, people who likely relied on and held sacred the backyards we celebrate in this series. The Urban Ecology Center staff and board are reading the book Killers of the Flower Moon by David Gran. If you'd like to check this out from your local library or buy it from Boswell Books, you can read along with us and engage in the discussion. The Backyard Naturalist series belongs to a clearinghouse of excellent stories, activities, and videos known as the UEC in My Backyard. Some recent additions worth checking out are a blog written by Community Programs Manager Mike Larson, recounting a recent 10-mile hike he led as part of Hike Milwaukee, and he gives you 10 tips for doing your own 10-mile hike. Also, your homework for this week is to watch Jeff Bagelin's Virtual Botany Walk, where he describes 5 different species of goldenrod we can find in these parts. There's also a printable recipe to make your own Asian garden slaw out of the carrots, cabbage, onions, and cilantro you may have growing in your backyard or being stored in your pantry. And Danny Priddle has a new 5 facts with Danny about the coho salmon. And speaking of salmon, our next salmon-themed Yardversity package is just around the corner. Or should I say the River Bend, running from Thursday, October 22nd through Saturday, October 24th. On Thursday night, we have our first members-only trivia night run by the extremely talented Danny Priddle, who, just so you know, is also part of our marketing department, where they coordinate UEC in My Backyard, and they're going to be kicking off a UEC podcast, and they're in charge of animals at the center and lots of other stuff. But if you're not a member, this is a great reason to become one. Grab some friends, make a virtual team, or sign up on your own. The event is free, and there will be prizes. And a pro tip, you will only hear this morning if you're joining me live or recorded on YouTube before the event. There will be a salmon-themed trivia round. And one of the best ways to prepare for that round is to watch Danny's 5 Facts videos about salmon, found exclusively on the UEC in My Backyard website. You can participate in the trivia night from anywhere in the world, but you do have to be a member. If you have any questions about becoming a member of the UEC, which is the best way to support our organization and keep programs like this alive, contact me, or better yet, contact our membership manager, Glenna Holstein. After trivia night, join us next Friday morning at this same time on this same channel to hear a talk from guest lecturer, DNR staff, and UEC educator Rob Dragani, who will be talking all things salmon with you. I'll be here watching it, and I hope you will too. And then on Saturday morning, we'll have another data collection session for Yardversity. The research team will be live for a couple hours, helping to get you set up to collect data as part of this really fun and important project. And we'll also be talking even more about salmon during that time. So if you haven't reached your fill of salmon after 3 straight days, then all I have to say is good for you. Okay. Why Canada Goose and why now? I guess that's to say I have a little bit of personal influence on this. Today is our 10-year wedding anniversary. So Jesse and I were married in Washington Park on October 16th, 2010. And just before the ceremony began, and just after one of the nearby fisher people finished admonishing a fish he had just caught with the words, "I told you I'd catch you," there was a slight pause before the ceremony, and then this happened. So that wasn't actual wedding footage because I'm not smart enough to figure out how to do that, but it was a pretty close proximity to what actually happened. And it was a pretty cool way to begin the ceremony as if it were planned. Okay. The Canada Goose. Before the talk, I spoke with the folks tuning in here live and asked what words they associated with geese. And I got duck, duck, goose, noisy, poop, honking, Wild Geese by Mary Oliver, and Horicon Marsh. And maybe some of those terms resonate with you. Maybe you have your own thoughts and images to add. The word I'd use to describe them is powerful. Today's talk is it's probably going to have a slightly different feel from some of the others, as is the case with many of the featured critters. There's a lot more stuff to talk about than can fit in 30 or 40 minutes. And I try to find things that you don't really find in a quick Google search. So likely because geese are super common, they've been well studied, they're important to people for food and feathers. There is a lot of really great information out there. And I'll touch on some of the things you'd expect me to, but I'm also going to skip over some of the most common and well-known information in the interest of time. But if you do want to learn more, Cornell University, National Audubon, and some other websites have great species accounts. So if you want to learn more about the phylogenetic relationships of birds, we go heavy into that in the talks on house sparrows, cardinals, robins, and starlings from season 1. But the goose is the first bird we featured that's not in that large order of passeriforms or the perching birds or songbirds. Instead, the goose is in the answeriforms order, along with screamers, the magpie goose, and ducks, geese, and swans, typically what we would call waterfowl. Almost all answeriforms are adapted to aquatic life. Most of them have webbed feet. They don't have the perching feet the songbirds do. And a bit of random trivia, they're one of the only groups of birds with external phalli. Most male birds simply have a cloaca for sperm transfer, but this group, along with the tinamous, have an external penis, which is really an extension of the cloacal wall, and they fill it with lymph instead of blood, the way it is with mammals and other groups. And just in case you're wondering what that looks like, with apologies to the easily embarrassed like myself, both the phallus and the female vagina both tend to be corkscrew shaped, as this Google image so delicately depicts. And this allows for greater female control of which males will successfully fertilize their eggs. Ducks, geese, and swans are part of the family Anatidae, which is a widespread group around the world of swans, geese, and ducks. There's 146 species. They tend to be monogamous breeders for life, with some exceptions, and many of them, like the Canada goose, undergo long annual migrations. Some species have been domesticated and now have such exotic names as domestic duck and domestic goose. And many of these are hunted as game birds for food and recreation. The genus is Branta, which translates from Anglo-Saxon meaning burnt, referring to the dark or burnt appearance of the species in this genus, which are also known as the black geese. They're the only geese with black legs, and they also have black bills and large patches of black on the head and neck, usually contrasting with the white markings by the tail and the lighter colors on the breast. They tend to be smaller than other geese, yet this group also has the largest species of wild goose on Earth, which is a subspecies of the Canada goose. And the Canada goose is Branta canadensis, or the Canada goose. So why is it called the Canada goose? A look at its distribution as a native distribution is a good indicator of its breeding range, which overlaps fairly well with most of Canada and the northern United States. So that's why it's called the Canada goose. Goose migration is not at all simple. Some populations are obligate, some are facultative, meaning some populations have to migrate, some don't, and some only migrate as far as they need to based on the weather. For more on the complexities of these types of migrations, you can go back to season 1 and watch America's Next Top Robin. But I will say that in the time of Aldo Leopold, the geese migration was a regular occurrence, and you could set your seasonal calendar by the return of the migratory geese. But as humans have adapted the landscape in favor of geese, and with a warming planet, it's not quite as simple as it used to be, and we see geese here year-round. So with that, I'm now going to turn it over to Danny Pirtle, because this is a UEC team effort today, and I'll let Danny continue our look into the Canada Goose as we watch their 5 facts on the Canada Goose that they recorded a couple weeks ago.
Hey there, welcome to 5 Facts with Danny. That's me, I'm Danny. And I am filming this on the very last day of August. It's hot, it's summery, and it's hard to believe that fall is just around the corner. But right now, there are birds all over the place who are currently gearing up for what fall means for them. And what fall means for them is migration. Now, when I think of fall migration, there is one quintessential bird species that always comes to mind. And we're going to be seeing and hearing a lot of them in the very near future. So today, I want to share with you 5 facts about the Canada Goose. Here we go. Fact number 1. There is a subspecies of the Canada goose called the giant Canada goose. Now, scientific name for Canada goose, Branta canadensis, pretty straightforward. Branta means goose, canadensis means Canada, but the subspecies name is Brantus canadensis maxima. Again, pretty straightforward why the giant Canada goose would have that addition to its name. Now, if like me, you are currently dreaming visions of giant Godzilla-like geese terrorizing the villages, unfortunately, that's not the case. The giant Canada goose is only a little bit larger than the regular, more common Canada goose species, and honestly, sometimes it's hard to distinguish them. There are a couple clues you can look for, though. First and foremost, their honk is going to be a little bit lower in pitch than the average Canada goose. They also have a longer beak to body proportion, and the black on their neck starts a little bit further up than on the regular Canada goose. If you ever find yourself faced with that age-old question of would you rather fight 100 regular-sized giant Canada goose or one giant-sized regular Canada goose, you're going to want to go with the one giant-sized regular Canada goose because, again, the difference is pretty negligible. Fact number 2. Canada goose, as you probably know, is one of the most well-adapted animals to human populations. That's why we see so many of them all the time. And the reason for that is that their habitat requirements are pretty much just an open field plus water. That's all they need. And us humans have created a lot of those open fields for them. So if you think about like soccer fields, golf courses, right here where I'm standing in Estabrook Park is actually great habitat for Canada goose because there's lots of open space. Plus there's the lagoon right here, there's the Milwaukee River just over that way, and that's all they need. They love that open field because that means that when they're sitting on their nest, they can see for a long ways to see if any predators are coming. So it's really a safety thing. So if you ever find yourself annoyed that a field that you're spending time in is just full of Canada geese, really that's on us. We created that perfect habitat for them, and they're just taking advantage of that. Fact number 3. Canada geese do something called assortative mating. And so what that means is that when they're looking for a mate, one of the #1 factors that they're looking to match up with someone is if that goose is similar in size to them. So there's a pretty wide range of size of Canada geese. However, when a male and a female are looking to mate with each other, they're going to look for the geese that are most similar in size to them. Fact number 4. Canada geese are family birds. So once the male and female have found each other and they've mated, they are typically going to stay together throughout the season, if not further. So oftentimes in the springtime when you see a group of geese, you'll see 2 adults and a whole lot of little babies and then eventually teenage geese. That is probably the mated male and female and all of their little goslings. They stick together throughout that season. And even in the fall, when you see a group of geese flying overhead migrating south, odds are that that is a family unit. Again, probably 2 parents and their little geese, or if it's a really large group, 2 or 3 or more families that have joined together to do that migration together. So they're really family-oriented birds, which is really sweet, isn't it? And fact number 5, that infamous V formation that geese fly in when they're doing their fall migration, the reason for that V is because it's an energy-saving maneuver. When they fly in the specific V formation, what happens is that one goose flapping its wings creates an updraft that the goose behind it is able to then ride and not have to flap its wings as hard, not have to use as much energy. In fact, each of the geese that are flying behind another goose in this V formation could save up to 70% of the amount of energy that they would be otherwise using. So that goose in front, that goose is doing all the work, but don't worry, because geese, when they're flying, they always are rotating in and out of position. So they're all taking equal turns up at that front spot, which is where they're expending the most energy. So the next time you see that V formation flying ahead as geese are flying south for the winter, just think to yourself how cool it is that they're all working together to find the most efficient way possible to get to their destination. And there you have it, our 5 facts about the Canada goose. So, fall migration is upon us. We're going to be seeing a lot of Canada geese in the next few months flying overhead, covering all our fields. And before you get frustrated with them and before you get scared of them, think about how they're just doing everything they can to survive and thrive in this world that we're sharing with them. So, be on the lookout for those geese. Have a great fall migration, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye.
All right, thanks, Danny. And for those of you watching this at your home, you knew that this episode was going to feature flight and that infamous flying bee at some point. And this video is probably the most efficient and most complete video summing up the Canada goose. And Danny gave a great introduction to the flying bee. I do have a few more things to add about goose flight, but before that, I really kind of want to take a step back and marvel at how really flippin' big geese are. I think we probably overlook this because they're so common, but the Canada goose can get up to 24 pounds with over a 7-foot wingspan. So that's 10 pounds heavier than the heaviest bald eagles with the same wingspan size. And if I were to say one thing about geese, they're big, they're intimidating, and they're tough. There's a podcast called Species hosted by Mac and Murphy, and he opens up a story about a kid who's attacked on a playground. And we don't know until the end that it's not another kid that attacked him, but it was a giant Canada goose. And he also said a quick search on the internet found geese attacking a herd of cows and a goose attacking an elephant at a zoo. And so they're really tough, and they're actually much more aggressive in urban habitats where humans are common and not really seen as a threat to them. They're defending their babies, but if you go to areas where geese are regularly hunted by humans, they tend to be much more secretive. But here in the city, they have a reputation. In fact, Mental Floss describes geese in cities actually as forming gangs, and I quote, "Where populations are dense, Canada geese commonly form gang broods, groups of 20 to 100 goslings from different parents that move around and feed together, accompanied by a few adults. This is sometimes cooperative, with families joining up so that some adults can watch the babies while others forage for food. Sometimes, though, joining a gang brood isn't voluntary, and dominant pairs of geese have been known to attack and kill other adults and absorb their broods into their own. Either way, it's good for the goslings, since larger families can more easily control the best foraging spots." When you see a field of 100 geese in places like Washington Park, that is quite literally a ton of birds. Corral them all together, and that weighs more than a Chevy Chevette. So again, I think we're used to them being around, so we don't really consider how massive they are, but that's a lot of weight on a bird, especially when you think that now they're going to take that mass and get it up in the sky. A goose weighs the same as the average 2-year toddler, or 3 gallons of milk. So I think back to the time when I thought I could carry 3 gallons of milk or juice from the car to the house at the same time. And now imagine carrying those 3 gallons and flying. And flying is one of the most energetically costly activities in the entire animal world. In previous lectures, I've covered the incredible adaptations birds have in flying for flight, like how birds can sleep with half of their brain at a time, or that incredible chain reaction of muscle impulses or circular breathing. And it's incredible no matter the size of the bird. But it's really incredible when you imagine a bird as heavy as a goose getting airborne or this Cory bustard that weighs 42 pounds. So that's a goose and a half. But at the end of the day, the goose is taking advantage of the same principles of flight that allows a human, or allows humans, to put a 700-ton plane in the air. It's all about pressure differences in moving air. The Canada Goose can fly up to 70 miles per hour in the right conditions, and they can cover a mind-blowing 1,500 miles in one day, which means a goose could literally wake up in Mexico at 4 a.m. and go to sleep in Canada on that same day at about 8 p.m. So incredible flyers. And back to that bee, Danny mentioned that flying in a V formation results in about a 70% savings on energy. And another way to look at that is that they can fly 70% farther in that V formation than they could if they were flying on their own. So this is the primary benefit of flying in the V formation. And I always imagined that V was just kind of this flat plane, but I was wrong. The geese that are trailing the lead goose are slightly higher, at a slightly higher elevation, as are the geese trailing them. So that when you get to the end of the line, those last geese are traveling quite a bit higher than that lead goose. And it's really, we really can't see that because we're looking at it from below. But that entire V is pointing downwards at the front. And the reason for that has to do with aerodynamics and friction and vortices. And a great way to think about that is to remember the last time you took a nice paddle in a canoe or a kayak. The water is smooth, you dip your paddle in the water, take a stroke, and you see that your paddle creates a really cool looking vortex, a traveling vortex in the water. So now imagine that the wing of the goose is a canoe paddle, except it's moving up and down instead of front to back, and it's moving through air rather than water. The tip of the wing creates a horizontal vortex in the air. And like any vortex, or if you think of like a hurricane, the air on one side is moving the opposite direction as the air on the other side. So in this case, the air closest to the bird is moving down, and the air off the wing is moving up. The air that's moving up is called an updraft, or sometimes an upwash. So if you were a goose flying directly behind this bird, you'd be fighting a downdraft, which would make it harder to remain airborne. But if you positioned yourself at that sweet spot, just off to the side and slightly higher, you're taking advantage of the updraft from the wing of the leading goose, which makes it easier for you to stay in the air. But it's not just that position, and this is new to me. The trailing goose is also timing its wing beats precisely with the wing beats of the lead goose to take advantage of maximum updraft. They're not flapping at the same time, but they're flapping to take advantage of maximum updraft, which is a slight delay. And if the lead goose has to adjust its wing beat pattern ever so slightly, the geese behind it will also immediately adjust each in turn. So the next time you see geese flying in a wedge, look really closely, not only at the position of the geese, you really try to see if you can see the V in 3 dimensions, see if you can see the downward pointing, or maybe imagine it. And then also look closely at the wing beat patterns. They're not going to be synchronous like a ballet, but they're not just flapping their wings, on their own randomly either. So, and that brings us to another pretty amazing fact, that this behavior is not purely instinctual. Individual birds have to practice and kind of figure out for themselves the ideal position to get maximum updraft and that ideal wing beat pattern when to flap. So just like we humans learn how to walk or ride a bicycle, we get help, and so do the geese from our families. But in the end, we have to figure the rest out kind of on our own. Another advantage to this V-shaped pattern is that it allows for group coordination and communication. So when the lead goose drops out, another goose immediately takes its place. And how they choose who will do it and when, we have no idea. But we do know that in general, birds tend to fly next to the same individuals more often than not. So they kind of get used to where they're supposed to be in line. And the group then can also get more efficient as they practice and flying together. So kind of like a sports team. If you play with the same people for a long time, you really have a better understanding how your teammates work and how the group can play better together. And it's a similar principle with a group of geese. The more they practice, the better they get, the more efficient they get. So now we'll take one last quick video break from one of my other favorite hosts, Josh Clark, from the How Stuff Works website and the Stuff You Should Know podcast, who we last saw in the Firefly episode. And he will give you his take on the Goose V in a way that only he can.
Maybe before.
Yep, go ahead.
We have a question of when they change the lead, where does the lead bird move to? So
I haven't found any, and I'm sure people have studied this, and maybe this information is out there, but I haven't found it, that I'm not aware of any kind of rhyme or reason. It's really, like Danny said, it's really this community effort, but there's got to be, it's like starlings in a flock. Like, how do they know to all move at the same time? And who decides which way that huge flock of starlings moves? We've been studying it a lot, but I don't think anybody's figured out how that works, whether it's age or experience or what. But maybe somebody out there knows more of this than I do, but I'm not sure if I haven't found anything that determines that. Any other questions?
Nope, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll get started here.
Hi, I'm Josh Clark, and thank you for joining me. This is Jumpy Dumb. Have you ever wondered why geese fly in a V formation? That one's easy. Don't even bother me with that one. Alright, I'll tell you. See, geese, especially the Canadian variety, can fly for as long as 16 hours at a stretch and cover tremendous different distances. And to do that, they fly in that V formation. See, the goose in the front of the V is taking most of the wind resistance and having to flap his wings the most. He's bearing the brunt of the labor. Since the rest of the geese fly slightly above and behind the head goose in that V formation, wind resistance is cut down and lift is produced, which means all the other geese in the V have to work less hard than the one in front, which means they can fly longer. But what about that lead goose? Well, when he gets tired, all he has to do is fall back into the formation and somebody else replaces him at the head to do most of the wing flapping. Hence, the geese can fly.
Not aware of how that works. Okay, I'd like to now revisit another point that Danny made in their early video, which is about goose habitat. They mentioned that they really only need open space and water. Geese are one of the very few animals that can eat turf grass, a group we looked at in season 1. So if you look at a flock of geese in a field and wonder, what are they eating? Well, they're eating the field. And like Danny said, the geese are only doing what geese do. We created this fantastic goose habitat all over the country, just like we did for things like rats and house sparrows. And when the populations exploded, we started seeing them as nuisance birds. And so after creating this goose-friendly habitat, now we're spending our time and resources trying to deter them from this habitat, hiring border collies or playing audio tapes of predators or fireworks or using wire, or my favorite is the predatory bird head on the sprinkler system. But if you really want to deter geese from a property, and you hear me say this a lot, replace the turf grass with natives. If you take away that openness that comes with the lawn, geese are going to go away. They're going to be too wary to hang out there if they can't really see around them. And if you don't want to take away an entire lawn, you can do a smaller project and still be really effective, which is what they did at Washington Park. And you can plant natives along shorelines to take away that easy access between the water and the grass. And geese, as I mentioned earlier, are a major economic engine related to the hunting industry, whether for recreation or food harvest. There are groups that will cull goose herds in parks and donate the meat to food pantries. And there is quite a bit of meat on those big birds, although as Marilyn pointed out, the verdict on how well they taste is still up in the air. So now let's try to make sense of goose vocabulary so we can all speak better geese. And let's start with the goose version of how to speak goose. And so I learned this trick from David Stokes, one of the best naturalists in the area. And if you want to speak geese, you start with a low kind of nasally, you can do this with me, just a low nasally, so just kind of from the back of your throat. So try that. And then at the end of it, you just give a nice little forceful. So you can try that at home, practice it. That's how you speak geese. Sometimes you can tell, as Danny mentioned, that the level, the pitch will be higher for smaller birds and lower for bigger birds. But because most males and females are usually about the same size, sometimes in a flock you can tell the difference between, or especially if a pair is flying overhead, you can sometimes tell the male and female based on the pitch that they start with. The male would be slightly lower. So in English, this picture is of one Canada goose, not, and I repeat, not called a Canadian goose. If this goose is a male, it would be called a gander. If it's a female, it would be called a goose. This is a gosling, but if you hang around with Glenna or Tori, you should more appropriately refer to it as a goose kitten. This is a flock of Canada geese, not a flock of Canadian geese. While on the ground, this flock is called a gaggle of geese, but in flight, the flock is referred to as a skein of geese, S-K-E-I-N, or sometimes known as a team. And as soon as they're in the V formation, they're called a wedge. So in just a few moments, the same geese can start as a gaggle and then become a skein and then a wedge in short order. And we'll wrap up this goose party with my final 3 fun facts. First, geese make excellent watchdogs, particularly in China. Geese are used to announce the presence of people that approach a property. I remember reading a story about a ninja warrior whose plan was foiled when a flock of noisy watch geese announced his presence. Second, in the wintertime, it's pretty common to see a goose doing this on a frozen pond. It's not likely that they lost a leg. They may be meditating, but that ice is pretty cold. So what they're doing is they're minimizing the amount of contact with the frozen water by tucking one leg up under those nice insulating feathers. But how does the other leg not get frostbite or freeze to the ice? And the solution is pretty cool. It's called countercurrent heat exchange. And it involves the arteries and veins getting really close to each other in the middle of that leg. So warm blood from inside the goose travels down to the foot, and the capillaries, which are all around there for gas exchange, and then it loses a lot of heat in the process, but not just to the atmosphere, because on the return trip up through the veins, the blood is receiving quite a bit of that heat from the outgoing blood. So it's very efficient in that the heat loss is going into the cold blood where it's gained in kind of a recycling system. And the blood going back into the body is only a little bit cooler than the blood leaving. If it didn't do that, that goose would be spending an awful lot of time trying to heat up that really cold blood that would be coming in, and it would be losing that heat to the environment, not kind of recycling it in its own. And so that wouldn't be a winning strategy. So this very efficient system allows a goose to stand on ice, exposing part of its body while still maintaining that nice warm body temperature. And incidentally, this is the same system found in the flippers of porpoises that hang out in icy Arctic waters. And why did I pick this particular porpoise? Because I think of geese as the orcas of the air, since they share that similar face pattern and they both are really tough icons of the natural world. So thank you for joining me on the program today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.